Okay, we'll get started with the introductions and stuff. So, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today for this third discussion in our series dedicated to psychiatric drug withdrawal. And on behalf of our partners, A Disorder for Everyone, the Council for Evidence-Based Psychiatry, and the International Institute for Psychiatric Drug Withdrawal, we're so grateful that so many can join us today. I've seen hello from Finland already. Hello, that's great. And thank you to all of you who chose to donate today too, because your support makes these events possible. My name is James. I work for Mad in America as host of the Mad in America podcast. And before we get underway with an introduction to the panel, I want to mention the people who behind the scenes make these discussions possible. So firstly, we have Shira Collins, and Shira works with Mad in America Continuing Education, and she'll be making sure that everything goes smoothly today. And we also have Lucy Fernandez. Lucy will be looking after the chat and moderating the viewer questions. And Lucy's the administrator for the International Institute for Psychiatric Drug Withdrawal. Hi there, Lucy. So we have an hour and a half today. The first hour is devoted to a panel discussion, and then we have 30 minutes at the end for viewer questions. And just to say, the discussion today is being recorded, and it will be available on Mad in America's YouTube channel for later viewing and sharing. Please feel free to ask questions, and we'll be selecting questions for the panel in the final part of this session. We won't have time to address all of your questions, sadly, but we will review all the questions submitted and try and build any we don't get to into future discussions. To ask a question, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom window, because questions placed in the chat are easy to miss. So if you put it in the Q&A section, then Lucy can see the questions raised. And please bear in mind, anything you write in the chat or the Q&A box can be seen by everybody. And just before we get going, I have to say the panel won't be able to respond to questions about individual circumstances surrounding withdrawal. And I know this will disappoint some of you to hear, but addressing individual difficulties in this kind of format is very hard, as there are so many complexities. And also, before we go any further, I do want to be clear that we will be discussing honestly and openly the experience of protracted problems after coming off psychiatric drugs. And if you are someone that's having a difficult time, then I just wanted to mention that you don't have to watch this discussion live. You can watch the video afterwards at your own pace, and you can stop or pause if you need to, because while it's important that we discuss these issues honestly, the last thing that we want to do is cause anybody further distress. And the panel today and for future discussions is not providing medical advice or making any specific recommendations regarding withdrawal from psychiatric drugs. Our aim is to explore and discuss. So I hope that's all clear. So on to the panel now, and I'm absolutely delighted to say that we have a wealth of knowledge and experience with us today, and I'm so grateful that the panel can be with us to talk about these issues. So without further ado from me, I'd like to ask the panel members to introduce themselves, and also could you say a little bit about how you became involved and interested in withdrawal related issues? So Adele, could we start with you?
Sure. My name is Adele Framer, and as Altostrata, I run a website called survivingantidepressants.org, which is specifically to support people in tapering off of psychiatric drugs and withdrawal, post-drug withdrawal syndrome. We currently have about 15,000 members and about 6,000 case histories of people tapering and also protracted withdrawal syndrome. This was intentional so that we could further research, and in fact, we have managed to get some research done. My own experience was that I came off Paxil, 10 milligrams of Paxil in 2004 over a couple of weeks, which is the customary way of going off. And I had protracted withdrawal syndrome for 11 years. I was fortunate to recover after 11 years. The latter half, I was unable to work. I was fortunately able to concentrate enough to start the website in 2011. I am now involved in, I've been researching the subject of psychiatric drug withdrawal since 2005, and that's my main focus right now is research.
Great, thank you, Adele. David, could we move on to you next?
Yes, James, you can. Hi, I'm David Healy, and I help run risk.org, which actually is a website that's been created by people who've been on antidepressants principally and whose lives have been, in one way or the other, severely compromised by being on them. We opened up risk.org around 2012, and the idea was to take reports on all drugs, but the majority of the drugs that have been reported to us have been the antidepressants. Now, going back a little bit, back before we got the SSRI group of drugs, I was doing a PhD on the serotonin system. So I ended up being the kind of person who the pharmaceutical industry, when they brought the drugs on the market, figured I was a good person to help educate doctors who are going to give these drugs out as to where the drugs fit in. And one of the interesting things about being in that role was it became awfully clear to me that what we knew about the serotonin system and what we knew about what these drugs did was totally at odds with the kind of messages doctors were being given in the first instance about what these drugs did. And, you know, that there was really very little grounds to believe the kinds of things doctors began to believe and the kinds of things they began to say to patients when they gave the drugs out, okay? And one of the other things that became clear working with the industry during this period was that I might be involved in trying to participate in a meeting, and the agreement was that there was going to be articles that came out of the meeting, and one of them would be by David Healy, for instance. And then I get an email with my article written for me, a very good David Healy article, but what I didn't realize was that it was written by ghostwriters and it had commercial messages of importance to the industry in it. These were hard to spot, and most people who knew me and the kinds of things I said wouldn't be able to pick out the non-Healy article from the real Healy article. So this is an introduction to the fact that almost all the literature about these drugs in the American Journal of Psychiatry and the British Journal of Psychiatry and the European Journal of Psychiatry and the Martian Journal of Psychiatry and the Lunar Journal of Psychiatry and every journal you care to think of is ghostwritten. They may have the names of distinguished authors on them from Yale or Harvard or UCLA or places like this, but these articles aren't written by those people. They just have their names on the articles and they get quite a bit of money for having their names on the article. And the other thing is that the regulators don't have the data from the clinical trials that these articles are reporting on. So when the article says, oh, there are no withdrawal problems from these drugs, well, actually, the regulators haven't seen the data from those clinical trials. They've seen company reports of what the data looks like. The people, but you know, this is just the company report, which is in essence ghostwritten the way the academic articles are. The guidelines which dictate how we get treated, well, they're based on the published literature. They're not based on the raw data either. So the bottom line really is when we look at who the experts are, and James has talked about a wealth of expertise, actually it's people listening in here, the 300 or so people listening in who are the experts. The people who've been on these drugs are the experts on these drugs. They know more about what the drugs are doing than the people who write the articles saying there are no problems and these drugs work well. And this became clear to me very early on after the drugs came on the market first in the UK, when I had a group of patients come along who became intensely suicidal on these drugs. And I had a choice of believing the literature, which is out there saying there's no problem, or believing the people who came to me and told very convincing stories. And I also, by accident almost, ended up been able to get to see the kind of data the regulators don't see and other people don't see from company trials, which showed that in the trials, the companies had seen exactly the same things that the patients coming to me were reporting. So one of the messages I have, I think, for all of you here is that, your expertise about what these drugs are doing to you is much more important than in the academic literature out there, or even than the doctors you go to see for help. Some of them will be clued in, but a lot of them won't. Now, in terms of withdrawal, which is the key issue here, this again came on the radar because, early on when the drugs came on the market, the selling point from industry was, these are antidepressants. You know, they're not like the benzodiazepines, those awful drugs that people get hooked to. In actual fact, antidepressants will cure the underlying problem, and there's no risk that you could get hooked to them. This was the early 1990s. And among the companies selling this kind of message, which people like me believed back then and said to patients, you know, there's no risk that you get hooked to these drugs. Among the companies with the first of the SSRIs was GSK, who brought paroxetine out. Now, within 3 years of paroxetine being on the UK market, there were more reports of people being dependent on it than there had been from 20 previous years from all of the benzodiazepines combined. And the companies knew beforehand that these problems were there. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for explaining that, David. And it's good to have you with us. Nicole, could we turn to you next?
Sure. Hi, everybody, and thank you so much for having me today. My name is Nicole Lamberson, and I was trained as a physician assistant in the United States. I'm no longer working currently or practicing due to the adverse effects of being prescribed psychiatric medications. I initially took them for work-related stress. I consider taking psychiatric medications one of the worst decisions in my life, second only to stopping them abruptly. And coming off of them was definitely one of the hardest things the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. I think I probably have a unique perspective as someone with both medical training and lived experience. There are a handful of us in the community. My story is long and convoluted, and I think without a deep dive into my medical records, which I have not yet done, I don't have an exact timeline for all the medications that I took and when, but I do know towards the end of taking them, I was on 6 at the same time, 2 benzodiazepines, Ambien, which is a Z drug, Seroquel, Remeron, and Adderall. I know I had been on and off of SSRIs and SNRIs, Lexapro, Effexor, and I was put on so many because the adverse effects of the ones prior were misdiagnosed as so-called mental illness, and I was prescribed more and more, which happens so frequently. Once I discovered that the drugs were making me sick, I discovered that through actually reading a journal article by a journalist called Matt Samet. He wrote his story and put it in a journal, and actually my father found it and gave me the journal article. And I read and realized what was happening, that I had been made sick by these medications. And unfortunately, I did not have the information at the time about tapering that I know now. And I went to a detox center where I was cold turkeyed in October of 2010. I developed severe and protracted withdrawal. Actually, the detox center added more medications. They only cold turkeyed the ones they deemed addictive. Of course, we know that all of them cause physical dependence. So they just, left me on physical dependence causing drugs and then added more, which I had to get off of. I'm off everything for 8 years and 5 months, although I've been in withdrawal since October of 2010 when the detox happened. I did have a short period there where I tried reinstating a benzodiazepine because I had severe akathisia and was extremely suicidal. For those of you kind of wondering what protracted withdrawal looks like, I'm still suffering from it currently. Some symptoms I still have are neuropathy, insomnia, anxiety. I have agoraphobia at times, which manifests looking like I have trouble driving places beyond a certain radius of my house or to new places. DPDR, which is depersonalization and derealization. I have cognitive and memory issues. Neuroemotions, which are feelings that come up that feel foreign to me. They feel very neurological as opposed to my actual real feelings. Fatigue, dizziness, nausea, headaches. I have very little tolerance to stress. I get agitated easily. So I got involved in the withdrawal community because I think I was looking for some purpose while I was suffering. Probably some selfish reasons as well, to find out information and to save myself. And, that's why I started researching and studying everything I could. I also felt a duty to speak up and expose this so that other patients could be spared if possible. And I administered my own support group that I still have, although it's very small now, where I learned a lot. Because I had medical training, I could do math for people's tapers, and I really understood it well. So I started noticing some trends in the withdrawal support group about what worked for people and what didn't. So long story short, all of that led me to, first I started volunteering with World Benzo Awareness Day. Then I joined the medical advisory board at Benzodiazepine Information Coalition. Alongside Laura Delano, I co-founded the Withdrawal Project, which is a project of Intercompass Initiative. I now work doing outreach for the film Medicating Normal. And most recently, I joined the Colorado Consortium's Benzo Action Work Group. So that's all for me.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you so much for being with us. And finally, Will, if we could hear from you, that would be great.
Yeah, thank you, James. And I want to thank everybody for putting this this event on. And it's wonderful to be on a panel with all of you. I've been learning from all of you, your experiences and your work. So thank you very much. So I was diagnosed with schizophrenia. I consider myself a survivor of the diagnosis. The treatment that I experienced was not helpful. It was harmful. And I was seeing people around me. Some people seemed to benefit from treatments, and some people seem to get a lot worse. And I was not helped by the system. And I learned that a lot of the messages that I was told that were rationalizing the drugs that I was given, the forced treatment that I was given, that these messages weren't actually true. If you look at the research, that what is defined and diagnosed as schizophrenia is a lot more complicated and controversial, that when I had suicidal feelings and I was forced into a hospital, the research actually doesn't support that was actually the best response to me. There's not research supporting that a suicide assessment and forced treatment as a preventative measure is actually positive and useful for people. So I started to ask a lot of my own questions as part of my own recovery process. And I was able to get off of medications, taking antipsychotics, and it wasn't really until I found the psychiatric survivor movement that my process of reclaiming my life really came together. I was on disability for about 15 years, and one of the big shifts for me was learning to have a different relationship to what was called symptoms. In my experience, I started to learn about trauma. I also learned about different cultural ways of understanding, different interpretive ways of approaching what I was going through. So I was able to really turn my life around through co-founding a support community called the Freedom Center in Western Massachusetts. And then I went on to be involved with the Icarus Project, which is now the Fireweed Collective. And when we were doing support groups, we would find many, many people coming for support around their medications. And we found that the messages that they were getting from their providers were often false, usually false, often very harmful responses from their providers. So we were doing self-help work around this. And much in the same way that the women's movement in the 70s had to start to do self-help in response to the male-dominated medical system to get actual perspectives and experiences brought to the fore, that's what we started to do. And I authored, from the experiences in our groups, I authored the Harm Reduction Guide to Coming Off Psychiatric Drugs. That led to me being more involved as a counselor and doing trainings and being involved in teaching. And now I am a PhD student at Maastricht University in the Netherlands, working with Professor Jim Van Os, as well as being a therapist and as well as doing community work. And my PhD work is focused on antipsychotic drug withdrawal. So I'm not going to be able to go so deep as I'd like to into the preliminary results, some of the preliminary results, but I'm going to present some of that, and I have it as some slides for you because I can only kind of go over the overview of it. So I'm very I'm very happy to be here, and I think that this what we're working on and what we're discussing is part of a larger problem in the United States and really globally, and it's the problem of regulatory capture. That the institutions, the agencies, the governmental bodies that are mandated to protect consumers, to protect patients, and to oversee industry have actually been captured by that industry and are working alongside those industries in violation of the public mandate as a form of institutional corruption. So I think that the psychiatric survivor movement and the work that we're doing here is really trying to challenge that and get mental health care and medical research on a less corrupt footing and actually respond to people's experience. So I'm really glad to be here, and you can check out my website, which is willhall.net.
Great. Thank you so much, Will, and thank you all of you for giving your time to be with us today. So I'd like to delve a little bit more into your individual areas of expertise and your work as it relates to long-term problems after stopping psychiatric drugs. So Will, if it's okay to start with you, you talked a little bit there about your work with Maastricht University and the International Antipsychotic Withdrawal Survey. So would it be okay for you to talk us through some of your preliminary findings?
Let's do it. So I prepared a slide. I'm not a slide set. I'm not going to be able to go through and read the entire thing and present all of it, but it is available to you to review for your personal use at willhall.net/Maastricht study with 2 A's. And I think Lucy is putting that into the chat box. So should I go ahead and share my screen? Would that be?
Please do.
Okay. So can everyone see this?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm just going to go through this relatively quickly. I first of all want to say that it does seem that antipsychotic withdrawal has some unique, distinct characteristics, very different than benzodiazepine and antidepressant withdrawal. And so this is really being aware of that there are commonalities and differences. So, and this is preliminary data, and we haven't had a chance to do the analysis that we're planning on doing. So let's see, let me get this going. Okay, first of all, I want to thank the many people who have been involved with this, including my study committee, Jim Van Oss, Sandra Escher, John Reed, and Joanna Moncrief. And I'm just going to go through this. You're going to be able to refer to it in the link. Also, I want to thank one of my collaborators, Rachel Flanagan, who's an economist at the University of Nevada, Reno. And study partners include the International Institute for Psychiatric Drug Withdrawal. And the survey itself that we released was crowdsourced. So I want to thank all the people who gave input into what actually should be in the study. The rationale, we've been basically discussing it. There's a gap in the knowledge around antipsychotic withdrawal, and there's a lot of bad messages out there, a lot of corrupted research and corrupted science. Basically, the design is we asked people 18 years and older to complete an anonymous web survey. There were about 167 questions, most of them multiple choice, but we also had a lot of opportunity for text responses. It was quite a lengthy survey, 30 minutes, but all the data was collected. And so, of course, we didn't have everybody answering all the questions. Question areas were very broad: demographic information, information about the medication use, diagnosis, the method of antipsychotic withdrawal, the side effects. So we're asking respondents who attempted to come off withdrawal, attempted to come off of antipsychotics. So that included people who had successfully come off and people who had not. We had 71 countries represented, mostly USA, UK, and Canada, a lot of people from Spain and Europe as well. We represented 12 different languages in translations of the survey itself. So this is preliminary data. I want to emphasize that you've heard this before: correlation is not causation, and individual experience is not aggregate experience. I think this is one of the real problems with medical scientific research, is that we get, say, treatment recommendations based on statistical aggregates. And I think that's quite disastrous. So I want to really emphasize that people should follow their individual experience, not what the percentages are saying about large group experience. It's an epidemiological study. It's a large population study. So we're going to be adding more respondents, and we're also doing a factor analysis of all the different variables. Antipsychotic post-withdrawal harm. There's an interesting paper by Chouinard, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing their name right, on rebound psychosis and supersensitivity psychosis. Those are the two main problems. It's also the original problems that the person was prescribed to begin with may reassert themselves. And then there's the long-term damage from antipsychotic exposure, and then damage that may be specific to the withdrawal process itself. It seems like one of the biggest harms is what gets called relapse, that someone is on an antipsychotic, they're in the community, they come off, and then they end up back in a crisis and hospitalization. But that can be related to the medication and the withdrawal process, not necessarily an underlying crisis or emotional or disorder process. Like I said, it does seem that there are some distinctions maybe associated with the different receptors. The GABA and the serotonin receptors don't seem as implicated in antipsychotic use. The survey is complicated, of course, because many people are using multiple drugs. Benzodiazepine antidepressant post-withdrawal is not associated, it doesn't seem, with psychosis and this kind of acute hospitalization, sudden crisis, the way that antipsychotics are. And there's a lot of distinct things about antidepressants and benzodiazepines, but I don't want to overgeneralize because there's a lot of complexity here, and I think my other panelists can also speak to that. We broke the respondents into 3 comparison withdrawal groups: off all meds, off just antipsychotics, and still on antipsychotics. And the comparisons are quite interesting. The vast majority of people, or the majority of people who responded to the survey, were off of all antipsychotics. Some of them were taking other meds, but the majority of them were off all antipsychotics. And many of the people who were still on antipsychotics were able to reduce their dosage. Some general findings: the off all meds group was widely represented. So we didn't find any niche of people who could not come off or weren't also reporting coming off. For example, we had 705 respondents who've been on antipsychotics 20 years or more, and almost 40% of those came off of all antipsychotics. There was not a correlation between education level or employment and withdrawal group outcome. And there's a lot more correlations like this that we're going to be coming up with in the further analysis. So it did seem that longer time on the antipsychotics was correlated with greater difficulty. So more lasting effects, more likely to remain on medications, more correlated with rating withdrawal as harder, more severe withdrawal effects. However, longer time on antipsychotics did not correlate with a greater likelihood of being hospitalized after coming off. So longer time on antipsychotics does seem to be a clear factor here. And again, I'm just moving through pretty quickly. Other withdrawal group outcomes include age of first hospitalization did not correlate, greater agreement with your diagnosis correlated with a lesser likelihood to be completely off, more past attempts only slightly correlated with less likelihood to be completely off. Exposure to multiple medications did not significantly correlate with being completely off. We're not quite sure why that is, but that was one of the findings. Some other general findings there. Now, getting to the question of post-withdrawal, we asked people, do you have lasting negative effects? And the results here are, of course, the majority of people did say that they had lasting negative effects. We have 75, we have 68% saying that yes, they had lasting negative effects, and only 31%. And that's broken down by whether they were still on or not, or off, but also taking other drugs. What difference did coming off make for your health? Dramatic reports that the coming off process improved people's health. Did the negative withdrawal effects ever go away completely. Actually, we're showing that more than 70% of people did say that the negative withdrawal effects went away in 3 months or less. But again, it's a little difficult to analyze because there are negative withdrawal effects and then long-term effects that may be just related to exposure in general. We asked people about mental health, and people reported that either their mental health was about the same or got worse as a result of the withdrawal process, which we could maybe expect because of the tranquilizing effects of these drugs and the way in which they so-called stabilize people, that people may be experiencing a little bit more distress in their life when they're off of the medications. But the most important thing, and I think this was the most significant finding of the study that I want to really draw people's attention to, is we asked people, were you glad you tried to come off? And this is something that I encounter as a counselor and in groups a lot. People are afraid. Are they going to make the wrong choice? Are they going to be regretting things afterwards? Of all the people that we studied, people who came off but stayed on other meds, and then people who stayed on their antipsychotics, overwhelmingly, people were glad that they tried to come off, whether they were successful or not. And there was no or weak correlation between being glad that you came off with how hard it was or being on antipsychotics longer. So very strong and very also surprising finding. Even of the people who had very difficult experiences trying to come off, overwhelmingly of the people who did come off, overwhelmingly they reported that they were glad that they came off. This is a very significant finding, and it's very encouraging for me. It's also consistent with what I see with people once they get started with the process of antipsychotic withdrawal. They do find it to be, a lot of people find it to be something that they're glad that they did. Another question that we asked, which is very personally very interesting to me, because I'm someone who, I live with so-called symptoms, I live with suicidal feelings, I live with hearing voices, I go into altered states, I can become very withdrawn. All these things would qualify me for a psychosis diagnosis, and a psychiatrist would maybe say, you need to be back on meds, Mr. Hall, or you have to prevent these experiences. I live with these experiences, and actually a lot of people in the Hearing Voices movement, in the International Psychiatric Survivors movement, in a lot of different contexts, report that we would rather be living with these experiences, and we find even value in these experiences. We'd rather do that than be on medication. So we asked this question of, are you living with these extreme states? And 42% said that they are, which is a very large number. And of the people who said that they are, a very significant number of them were able to come off of medications. So of the people who were off of antipsychotics, and whether they're taking meds or not taking meds, other meds, the majority of them, a slightly more than 50%, are living with extreme states. They're living with experiences that would be called psychosis. So that is very strong policy recommendation, that instead of saying, should you come off or should you not come off based on will you be experiencing a return to symptoms, it suggests maybe changing our relationship to what these symptoms are, and recognizing that many people can choose to live with so-called symptoms successfully as part of their coming off process. So again, I understand this is very rushed. Please check out the webpage, willhall.net/Maastricht study. That's with 2 A's. You'll get the entire slide deck, a lot of other resources, and sign up for the email list for the survey updates, and feel free to contact me about anything. So thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Will. That was really helpful. Adele, could we move on to you? And similarly, you've been doing some work on this. So could you tell us about some of the findings of your recent paper titled Protracted Withdrawal Syndrome After Stopping Antidepressants, a Descriptive Quantitative Analysis of Consumer Narratives from a Large Internet Forum? If you could tell us about that, and I think I've got some slides to share for you when you're ready.
Right. Yes, thanks very much, James. Yeah, this is a paper that was derived from a collection of cases on my website. reviewing the literature that's available on protracted withdrawal syndrome, there's very little. And to date, this is probably the most complete description of any type of psychotropic withdrawal, aside from Heather Ashton's excellent papers on benzodiazepine protracted withdrawal. So I'm going to be talking fast because I have to cover a lot of stuff. But I want to say in introduction that our purpose is to communicate to doctors about this pretty serious adverse effect of psychiatric drug treatment. This is specifically for antidepressants. And the language is not emotional. And I want to say that I understand how terrible and what a personal tragedy it is for each and every person to experience protracted withdrawal. It destroys lives, it destroys families, and I just want you to know that this paper is to communicate to doctors, and it is not intended to condemn anyone or to frighten anyone. James, if you'll put up the cover page, I'll introduce the paper. I was fortunate to work with a experienced researcher, Michael Hengartner, and his associates, Lucas Schulthaus and Anders Sorensen, on this. It was published on Christmas Eve 2020, so you might have missed it. But it has been downloaded 9,000 times, which is a bestseller in terms of journal articles. The data was collected in early 2020, and originally we collected 94 pseudonymous patient narratives about going off of antidepressants and experiencing protracted withdrawal syndrome. So all of these people had been tagged in a very random way for protracted withdrawal. There was no filter other than that they had been experiencing withdrawal symptoms for quite a while. And well, we can't say it's exactly random. It is, there were no biases in selection. So I personally believe that this is a fairly representative sample. The 94 cases were winnowed down to 69 by applying certain diagnostic criteria in the paper by Schweinar and Schweinar on protracted withdrawal symptoms. We've included that paper. It's I believe it's 2015 new diagnosis, I think it's called, and the so that'll be in the references. So we looked at 69 of these subjects, and we measured the duration of withdrawal up to September 30th of 2020. So that was the cutoff point. Now, these again are people from my website, and they may have checked in once in a while for many years, or they may have posted once or twice 5 years ago and not come back, or they may actually have visited by September 2020 and given us and reported on how they're currently feeling. So this is quite a various population. What we found was the duration of protracted withdrawal syndrome lasted from 5 to 166 months or 14 years. James, can we have the second slide?
Yep. Hang on. Yep, there you go.
Oh, here are the drugs. Okay, so these are the usual suspects. They all went off antidepressants, and What's interesting here is that fluoxetine or Prozac represents 10% of these drugs. So people that were experiencing protracted withdrawal syndrome from Prozac, if your doctor says Prozac is self-tapering, it is not self-tapering. It does have its own withdrawal syndrome, but because of its long half-life, it'll show up later. Can we move on to the next slide? Thank you. Oh, this is figure 4. Okay.
Which one did you want, Adele? I can bring whichever one up.
This is, okay, so these are the symptoms that we found. This is important because the first bar says somatic symptoms. That is a composite of several of the following bars. So it's not a separate symptom on its own. What we wanted to do is to show that people were having somatic symptoms, meaning non-emotional symptoms that were not psychiatric, as well as what you would call, let's say, affective symptoms, which could be attributed to relapse of the psychiatric disorder. So what we're showing here is that about 73% of the population had somatic symptoms, which could not be attributed to relapse, and 82% had emotional symptoms, which might be mistaken for relapse. And there's, of course, because of the numbers here, there's a big overlap between these populations. And what this indicates is that there were a lot of people who were having both somatic and affective symptoms. And because they were having somatic symptoms, that indicates that their affective symptoms were not relapse. So what we were doing is countering the argument that protracted withdrawal is relapse. Okay, can we have the next slide, James?
Yep, yeah, of course.
All right, here's the duration. I think that most people are interested in duration. So what we found was the duration range from 5 to 166 months or 14 years. You can see that yellow dot way out there on the right. That's the person who had the longest experience of protracted withdrawal symptoms. And the yellow dot means that he reported that he was recovering. So he had not completely recovered, but he was recovering. The green dots mean fully recovered. The blue dots were people who had either reinstated the original drug or taken another drug and found that their protracted withdrawal symptoms were very much reduced. And unfortunately, we have 2 suicides in our population, which is, I think, very significant because it's not a large number of people. 69 is not a large number of people, and yet 2 people were so distressed that they killed themselves. This is one of the reasons that protracted withdrawal syndrome is so very, very important for medicine to understand. People can become extremely, extremely distraught, besides being incapacitated by the symptoms. Okay, the orange dots are those who had only some benefit from subsequent psychotropic treatment. So, and the gray dots are the people who hadn't responded by September 30th, and we're not exactly sure what their current status is. The next slide will show some more detail about this. Okay, so this shows that this may give you a better idea of the progression of protracted withdrawal syndrome, because you can see that as time goes on, outside of our outlier, who's way out there on that long yellow line at the bottom, as time goes on, there are more yellow and green bars, and each of those bars represents one person and recovering over time from protracted withdrawal. People are always asking, will I ever recover? Well, Yeah, but it'll be very slow. It'll be very frustrating. You'll experience lots of setbacks. Your symptoms will change frequently, most likely, and but you won't be able to see improvement over a month. But if you look back 3 months or 6 months, you may be able to see some improvement. So I think that this is very important to understand that that there is an indication that there is progressive recovery, but it can take a long time. As a matter of fact, the average time to recovery is 37 months or 3 years. The median is about 2 years, so 2 to 3 years is a ballpark guess. That average, of course, is pushed out by our very long yellow outlier, but probably only takes off a month or so. So it's about 2 to 3 years for recovery in general, and there are going to be people who recover in a shorter amount of time and people who recover in a longer amount of time. Okay. Do you have another slide, James?
Yep.
Okay. So here's another way to look at the recovery situation. That we confirmed that protracted withdrawal syndrome was ongoing for about 20% or 22% of the population. About 8% reported natural recovery. In other words, they thought that protracted withdrawal syndrome was completely behind them. And another more than 17% reported that they had seen some significant recovery. And we've got about 16% that had some kind of drug treatment. On my website, we always, well, we don't always, but we suggest to try very low dose reinstatement of the original drug. And interestingly enough, this often is effective for protracted withdrawal syndrome. Okay, I think that, is there another slide, James?
I think that's all of them.
Yeah, that's it. So I think that I covered just about everything here. I want to comment on how to generalize this information. Now, I mentioned that psychotropic withdrawal syndrome has some commonalities, and this is covered very well in a paper by Lerner and Klein from 2019. These are two people that were associated with the FDA, and this is an overview of protected with rather different types of withdrawal from all kinds of psychotropics, including what are called the illegal drugs, the drugs that are that are considered addictive. So, and benzodiazepines is in a gray area there, so it's always in both. It's always in both columns. So addictive and non-addictive. So what Lerner and Klein suggested is that there are commonalities across all of these, across psychotropics for protracted withdrawal syndrome, or rather any type of withdrawal symptoms. And in fact, there's a natural process that when anyone takes a psychotropic drug, whether it's illegal or not illegal, whether it is prescribed or not prescribed, that your nervous system will adapt. This is a natural process. Your nervous system is going to adapt to the presence of the drug. If you take the drug every day, your nervous system is going to adapt, and the rest of your body will adapt as well. And if you take the drug away, if you reduce the dosage or go off the drug suddenly, which is a terrible idea for just about any drug, that the your body needs to readapt to that absence, and the shock of not having that substance in the mix, which was supporting the operation of your entire body, is what causes withdrawal symptoms. And your body has to readapt to the absence of the drug. And that can be because of the complexity of all of the systems involved. It's not just the target receptors. Because of the complexity of all the systems involved, it may take a long time for that readaptation to take place. I think that there's a question in the among our Q&As about whether tapering reduces the risk of protracted withdrawal. Now, one of the things that we tried to show in the paper is that the protracted withdrawal is related to having a immediate withdrawal symptoms when you go off the drug. It's a progression. It's not a separate phenomenon, which is one misunderstanding that medicine has about it. That if you have withdrawal symptoms while you're tapering, and you have withdrawal symptoms when you finally go off of the drug completely, that's where protracted withdrawal comes from. Those withdrawal symptoms persist, and that is because your body needs that time to readapt to the drug. If you taper slowly, and this is somewhat of a theory, but it seems to work. Well, you're tapering. If you go off slowly enough, your body adapts as you very gradually slide down the dosage. So again, the gradual tapering is thought to reduce withdrawal symptoms while you're tapering, and withdrawal symptoms after you've gone off. From people on my website who have tried to go off drugs before, this seems to work. Because if they have their previous experience of going off their drug too fast, if they do it slower, they find that it works much better. Now, there may be also a population who has problems going off the drugs no matter how slowly they go. There's a lot of variability in your nervous system, and this hasn't been very well studied, but naturally, of course, we have to expect that there are going to be people at both ends of the spectrum, people who can quit very abruptly without any problem, and people who have problems no matter what they do. Okay. I just have a couple more comments, and that is that, again, that protracted withdrawal syndrome is not very well studied, and but there is a pamphlet from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, which is a United States agency called SAMHSA, that has a description of protracted withdrawal. It's also in our references, and it is, I think it applies pretty well to all kinds of protracted withdrawal, although it's just really addressing withdrawal from the so-called addictive drugs. And it seems as though, again, that it indicates that protracted withdrawal will last from 1 to 3 years, which accords with our findings. Although this is very sketchy, and it just seems as though it's a ballpark. I also want to point out that it seems as though sleep disturbances are pretty universal across tapering any psychotropic. That would be any drug that is prescribed or not prescribed, or legal or illegal. It seems as though that horrible withdrawal insomnia seems common to all of them. And there's a paper about this, which we also will have in our references. And lastly, I want to say that one of the very, very common results of going off of antidepressants or any other kind of psychiatric drug is a very distressing emotional anesthesia. It seems as though people cannot feel that the positive emotions are blocked, but they will often dip into just horrible experiences, re-experiencing the most traumatic experiences of their lives. So the top is cut off, but the bottom is has sort of dropped out. And this is an extremely alarming condition that is often misdiagnosed as treatment-resistant depression. And but what it is, it's a consequence of having been on the drug. It's the effect of the drug. This is what psychotropics do to people, is that they remodel their nervous systems, and when the drug is taken away, there's there a section of the symphony is missing. So this pervasive emotional anesthesia, people get very upset about it, and they don't feel the love they used to feel for their children. They feel very distant from their partners. It is a post-drug effect, and it will gradually fade. It could take years, I'm sorry to say, but it's something that it's a consequence of the drug, and it also occurs with addictive drugs. So I'm afraid that there are millions of people possibly walking around with this, thinking they have treatment-resistant depression and trying all different kinds of remedies for that. And if they leave their nervous systems alone, they might be a lot better off.
Thank you for sharing that, Adele. And looking at the time, I've been rather optimistic on how much we could get in the hour and a half we have. So we'll carry on as long as we can, as long as you don't mind bearing with us. And if we do have to squeeze the time for questions at the end, then we'll consider arranging a follow-up session. But I think it's important that we get to hear from all the panelists. So next, David, turning to you, if that's okay. So I know that you've done a lot of thinking and work around sexual dysfunction following the use of psychiatric drugs, and I wonder if you would mind sharing what you've come to understand. For example, does it only affect people after long-term use? What do we know about persistent sexual dysfunction?
Okay, James. Well, I'm Irish, and when I grew up in Ireland, we didn't have sex. There was no pornographic magazines, nothing. Girls were girls, and that was great, but we didn't have sex. So it was a bit of a surprise to me that I ended up getting involved in these issues. And the story began well over 20 years ago when a lady walked into my clinic one day, and she said, "Look, I've got a problem, and I'm not able to make love to my husband, and I've been on an SSRI." And I said the usual thing that doctors were saying, which is, yes, these drugs can interfere with your ability to make love, but once you come off them, and of course there's no problem coming off them, if you want to go away for a romantic weekend or whatever, you can just hold the drugs and everything should be fine. And she looked at me and said, "Well, I can rub a hard bristled brush up and down my genitals and feel nothing, and I have been off these drugs for 3 months." So this changed my life. I didn't actually write the case up, but I had 2 different cases in the course of a week or 2. A few years later, the first article on what later became called PSSD, that's post-SSRI sexual dysfunction, appeared. And even before that, and this is the condition that my lady had. She had numb genitals, she couldn't orgasm, and if you're a man, you don't, you can't orgasm either, and you've got erectile dysfunction, and whether you're male or female, you lose libido. So the opposite condition is called persistent genital arousal disorder, where as opposed to being genitally numb, you've got genital irritability, and this can be tremendously painful. People get the nerves to their pelvis cut in order to try and cure the problem. You have a lot of women, and it's mainly actually a condition that affects women, and it's linked to SSRI withdrawal. A lot of women have had clitoridectomies to try and solve the problem. So, this is a grim condition. The other thing that came on my radar a few years later, I mean, PGAD had actually been described before PSSD, but there's two more drugs that can cause this kind of problem. One's finasteride, which is used by young men who have thinning hair, men in the late teens, early 20s, and they figure, hey, this is awful. And the other drug that can cause a problem, and again, it's one that's used by young people, is isotretinoin, or Accutane, which is used for acne, and which is handed out by dermatologists who have never seen a problem with it, okay? So if we look at PSSD, one of the things, well, there's two or three things that this brings out to me. One is the theme that's come up before, which is the experts on what these drugs do are the people who go on them. If you look at the RCTs that have been done on all these drugs, well, the single commonest thing these drugs do to anyone is they'll make you genitally numb within 30 minutes of your first pill. There's not a single controlled trial around the place that shows this. Now, I think this is because RCTs essentially don't work. We're told they're the gold standard way to find out what drugs do. But if you don't alert people to the things to look for, then you're not going to find them. And there's a reason to think that the pharmaceutical industry probably knew that it was a good idea not to get doctors to ask people too closely about what might be happening in their love lives, because from 3 or 4 years before these drugs come on the UK market, UK regulators had reports of permanent sexual dysfunction being caused by them. Okay, so this is before the drugs have ever been marketed. This is in the first clinical trials that were being done. So this is of interest to me in terms of withdrawal. It fits into the bigger withdrawal picture in the sense that it's something that is most obvious when you withdraw from the pills. Like, I mean, you're genitally numb, you're not able, you've no interest to make love and things like that while you're on the pills. But when this goes on after you come off the pills, then it seems to feed into the whole withdrawal story. And it feeds in a few different ways. One is that it's clear to me that PSSD can start while you're on the pills. We call it post-SSRI, but in actual fact, people have very marked problems often when they go on the pills, and often from the first few days. You do not have to be on these pills for weeks or months to end up with a problem. A lot of people feel guilty afterwards because they say, look, I'm sure I came off them too fast, and could this have caused a problem? And the answer is no. Whether you come off them extremely slowly or whether you come off them quickly, you can end up with the problem. And I think part of the reason for this is that a lot of people have the problem even before they begin to come off. Okay, it's a bit like tardive dyskinesia from that point of view. This is a condition that's much worse when you come off, but it's clearly there while you're on the drugs. Okay, so in terms of moving all this forward, the withdrawal, well, PSSD also seemed good to me in terms of answering what's going on with withdrawal, in the sense of there's just a small little bit of genital skin in either males or females that is numb. If we can work out how it gets numb and why it stays numb, I think we have the answer to a lot of what's going on in withdrawal also, okay? And I think one of the things that's become clearer to me is it's not just a genital, I mean, as regards PSSD, it is a genital issue, but as I was talking to Nicole last week, and she actually mentioned vision problems. And what we see as well with SSRIs is that people can have a very similar picture that affects their vision. When you go on the drugs first, you can have acute problems. Things don't seem right with your vision. Things can get worse or may only appear when you try to withdraw from the drugs. And a lot of people, when they withdraw from the drugs, have protracted visual problems that go on for months or years afterwards. The light PSSD sheds on protracted withdrawal, and at this stage we've got over 1,000 cases reported to risk, is that these things can go on for years. Very few clear up in weeks or months, or at least it looks like very few clear up in weeks or months. The most seem to go on for a long period of time, but there's every hope that it can be cured. So this isn't a condition that looks like permanent damage. And my sense is it's not a brain condition either. It's much more a physical body problem, as a lot of the problems with these drugs are. You know, and you just have to look at Will there, who was on all these drugs and said he was disabled by them, but is highly articulate now. I think, you know, the brains of a lot of people who are on these drugs are still probably mostly normal. You know, the problems are largely physical. In terms of the antidepressants and withdrawal and PSSD, I think this is a feminist issue. It's not just, I mean, it is an issue for all of us, but it's mainly an issue, I think, for women, because more women end up on these drugs than men, and they've got reproductive consequences if you can't get off them. They double the rate of birth defects, double the rate of miscarriages, double the rate of children being born with autism, double the rate of children being born and ending up asexual if you've been exposed to these drugs when you're in the womb. The drugs trigger alcohol problems, and in the case of women who are on these drugs during pregnancy, you're 10 times more likely to have a child with fetal alcohol syndrome disorder if you're on these drugs. And you know, being pregnant, most women want to get off these drugs. Their natural instinct is to get off these drugs if they become pregnant. They're sometimes told by doctors, no, you really should stay on them. It's much more important that you remain happy and calm than anything. And these drugs don't cause any harm. But in actual fact, the main reason probably people can't get off them, even when they're motivated as strongly as a pregnant woman is because they can't get off them. It's literally so hard to get off them, okay? So the other things that the drugs do, which make them feminist issues, I think, and this was hinted at by Adele in one of the last things she said, which is while you're on them, you become emotionally numb. Now, this can be a thing that happens afterwards, but it's while you're on them also, and it seems to be closely linked to the genital numbness people have. And this is a potent source of marital breakup. You know, it's husbands who are on them leaving wives, wives who are on them leaving husbands, and often afterwards, when they come off the drugs, figuring, well, you know, I actually made a desperate mistake. One of the things I thought early on with this issue, when it came up first for me, unlike the issue about withdrawal when it came up first, and unlike the issue of suicide, was the media are going to be interested in this. This is sex after all, you know, they'll jump in on it, but they haven't been interested. One of the extraordinary things is that, you know, there's been complete radio silence, as we used to say, a complete media blackout on the issue. The media don't seem to want to pick it up. And this is concerning, I think, from a few different points of view. One is that, again, when these issues came on my radar first, it was very few teenage girls were being put on these drugs. We didn't give these drugs to teenagers generally. Now, the second most commonly used drugs by teenage girls are antidepressants. And, you know, these are women who are going to go through the childbearing years and not perhaps be able to get off the drugs at all, and potentially not be interested to make love and not be interested to have children. And in terms of the boys they might meet if they're on these drugs, well, we know the drugs wipe out your sperm count if you're male. And just last week from the United States, we've had reports of falling fertility rates. The United States is falling increasingly below the replacement rate needed to replace you know, the people that the country has. And this is true of Europe also. So it's and this is a tricky point to make perhaps, it's a largely white issue. And a lot of white people go around the place saying, we're awfully advanced, we believe in science and things like that, and we're the people who create all these drugs that are good for you. A lot of people of color don't buy into this quite as much as white people do. And there's a general sense there that, you know, if you're feeling out of sorts, if you've got difficulties, you turn to your community. So one of the messages that I've ended up with out of all this is that Black and brown communities matter, and they should be very reluctant to embrace what we white people have been so keen to embrace, and which is leading to us potentially being replaced. Okay, let's leave it at that.
Thank you, David. And I'm so grateful to you for being willing to look into this, because as we know, sexual dysfunction after psychiatric drugs has a great deal of shame and stigma and embarrassment attached to it, and people don't really want to discuss it. So it needs airing and it needs discussing. I just wondered if people out there are hearing about this for the first time, David, is there anywhere online they can go to find reliable resources to help them understand what might be happening to them?
Yes, there is, James. You can go to risk.org, and we've got a range of articles there. We've got most of the literature that has been produced on PSSD and PGAD and things like that. It can all be found there. You may have to hunt around a bit, but there is a tools page, and if you go into it, you'll see that there's an area for PSSD and related issues.
Fantastic. Thank you, David. And Nicole, turning to you now, I wondered if you as someone that's kind of experienced some of the issues that we've been discussing in terms of long-term difficulties after coming off the drugs, I wonder if you would be willing to share your perspective, both from that perspective, but also as someone who's worked in various advocacy roles for Medicating Normal and World Benzodiazepine Awareness Day. So I just wondered, what your thoughts were, really.
Sure, James, and I'll try to not take too long, so maybe we can get to some questions. I think, having been in the withdrawal support community for 10 years now, I've noticed that the most burning question is always, how long is this going to last? We've heard some averages here from Adele's great work, but I think the truth is we can't really predict accurately what another person's experience is going to be. There's probably a lot of factors. We don't have enough data yet. So ultimately, I think it's best not to compare to other people. Overall, though, in the 10 years that I've been around in the support groups, I think I've seen a lot of people recover. Most of the people who were present when I first showed up are no longer here. They're back living their lives and healthy again. I just want to say that Protracted is incredibly difficult to live with. In my opinion, the duration of suffering is the worst part, and also not knowing if it's going to go or how much longer it's going to last. I think in my own experience, I've thought many times over, I would have rather had the most severe suffering that I had just kind of crammed into the 3 years and then had it been over with, especially because of how much it affects your life the longer it goes on. That was briefly touched on by Adele as well, but these syndromes have massive implications for society and mostly for the protracted sufferer. Financially, most people cannot work, which means they're not investing in a mortgage, a 401k, they're not paying taxes. The losses are huge. Personally, I didn't attend my brother's wedding. What David was mentioning about this being a women's rights issue, I was not able to have children because I was so ill, and I'm 42 years old now. I couldn't get married. So people miss out on a lot of experiences and their life, and it's huge losses for the person experiencing protracted withdrawal. So we need to start taking this into consideration when overprescribing these drugs to people long term and for seemingly every symptom under the sun. I just want to talk also about how poorly understood protracted withdrawal is from the experience of the sufferer. First, family and friends. We're all used to that one of your loved ones could become sick at some point in life, and you may have to take care of them or help them. But usually that takes, one of two directions. The sick person gets better with some time, or they die. And in protracted withdrawal, we sort of, especially when you go on for long periods of time, like I have and some other people do, the process is absurdly lengthy and sometimes with no signs of improvement. So those around you, they start to lose hope. They can resent you. They project their own ideas of healthy living on you, like, oh, you just need to get, go for a walk, or perhaps, I can't tell you how many times I've been told to try fish oil. Told, maybe you do need medication. Sometimes maybe you're perceived as being a malingerer, or that you lack willpower. You're just not trying hard enough. So that's sort of insult to injury from your own family and friends. Even in the online support communities, for the most part, people who are in withdrawal and experiencing this stick together and we take care of each other. But let's be real, Protracted is a club that nobody wants to join. It's frightening as a possibility. And so I've noticed even amongst our own, there's some shunning or attempts at silencing or explaining away protracted people's experiences, like, oh, I bet they're probably drinking or doing something to cause it. Or those of us who are in Protracted are told that our story is scary. I've even seen people who healed quickly come back and patronize long-term sufferers, saying things like, I got better because I wanted to, you must like being sick. So in response to your story scares me, that's so understandable, but I'll just say that it's also really scary to live with protracted withdrawal. And so these people need support, and they need to be able to share honestly and openly about what they're experiencing and for how long. And also, if withdrawal is just, mild and fast resolving, we don't really need to address the issue. So these voices are important in awareness and change, and we need to make space for them because they're a huge part of the problem and one of the large risks of taking these medications long term. So we need to make that known. Doctors and medical providers don't understand protracted withdrawal. I don't know if I would have believed it had I not lived it myself, being a physician assistant. But anyone in protracted withdrawal has heard probably from a medical provider, the drug is out of your system, so it can't be from that. It must be from something else. Oftentimes, doctors will order all kinds of expensive medical tests, which most of the time come back negative. And they'll say, well, see, nothing is wrong with you. It really makes it hard to receive any kind of health care because most physicians and medical providers won't even include protracted withdrawal in their differential diagnosis. It is not even on their radar. And so because it's not recognized, it's also hard for people to get disability, which many people in protracted withdrawal need because you are so debilitated by the symptoms. This misunderstanding by the medical profession is also why protracted patients turn to the internet for support and information because they can't get it from their doctors. I've had doctors tell me, let's try to get you better. And they offer me more pills. And then any refusal on the part of the protracted person is seen as, you're a difficult or you're a non-compliant patient. When in reality, we know that it's often smart to not add more things into the mix. The brain is incredibly complex. We start adding more things and you can just add to the problem. There's lots of anecdotal evidence in the groups that some people get reactions and setbacks from taking medications and supplements. Dr. Heather Ashton hypothesized that this could be from the general hypersensitivity of the nervous system. Yeah, it's incredibly difficult to interact with the medical profession as somebody who is harmed by these medications in protracted withdrawal. I just want to do a quick plea. If there are medical providers listening, please believe your patients when they tell you about this syndrome. It is real. For those of you who already do believe us, thank you. And please advocate for your patients. We need you to advocate for us. And lastly, I'll just say with the terminology, calling this protracted withdrawal, I'll raise the question, is using that term withdrawal really relevant at some point? I've been off these medications for 8.5 years, and I feel like I have more of a long-term chronic health condition than I do a withdrawal. I haven't been withdrawing from anything in over 8 years. Do we need to consider if this is an injury or neurotoxicity? And perhaps different terminology would help with understanding, and maybe even more clear definitions, like what is protracted, when does it start, when does it get classified as protracted, and things like that. So yes, we need better awareness, we need more basic science research to explain the mechanisms of protracted, who is at risk, how to treat it, if there is any treatment at all. Thank you.
Nicole, thank you so much for sharing that. You know, I know it's never easy to share the things that we've been through, but I so appreciate you being with us and talking about those experiences. We'll move on to some viewer questions now. We'll try and carry on for 10 minutes past the set time. I hope that's okay with everybody. And the first, I'll just change the view so you can see the panel. The first question I want to start with is actually raised by Dr. Stuart Shipko, and I hope, Stuart, you're with us and you're watching us. If you are, hello. And this is for the panel to jump in as you want to. And Stuart asks, please ask the presenters to comment on tardive akathisia. Do the panel think it exists, or am I the only professional? Over the last few years, at least 100 people have contacted me about this. So before we come to the panel, for those who may be unfamiliar, tardive means delayed onset, and akathisia is sometimes described as an inner or outer feeling of agitation or restlessness, often accompanied by extreme anxiety, although this description probably doesn't really describe the experience that people relate. So over to the panel for your thoughts on tardive akathisia after stopping.
Can I jump in here quickly, James? This does relate quite well to the issue of sex, where PGAD, persistent genital arousal disorder, was initially called restless genital syndrome, and it very much looks like an akathisia of the genital area. And this does persist. Well, this can come on after you halt the drug, and halting SSRIs is the single commonest cause of this particular condition. It does come on after you halt the drugs. It's rarely there on them. It comes on afterwards and can last for months or years afterwards. So I agree completely with Stuart about this one. And it's also probably worth mentioning something that was mentioned by Nicole earlier. She talked about neural emotions. And I think this is a good phrase to capture some of the things that happen.
Thank you. Any other thoughts on akathisia?
Right. Yeah, neuroemotions was coined by a member of my website, and that is the sort of overwhelming, seemingly spontaneous emotions that show up that are due to the instability of your nervous system rather than any triggering event. And they can also, this can also apply to, let's say, feelings of mild irritation turn into rage. In other words, these negative emotions get exaggerated. About tardive akathisia, on occasion, people come back to my website who say that they've been off the drugs for X years, 2 or 3 years, and really felt that they had recovered, but they had experienced a resurgence of symptoms. Mostly, that would be the intense waves of anxiety that are very, very common in withdrawal. And often it's because there are a couple of triggers. One is alcohol. Another is antibiotics. And it seems as though in some of these cases, it's because they're feeling well, and they decided to have perhaps, one drink, one beer, a half a glass of wine, and that seems to, get these terrible feelings going again. And antibiotics in particular seem to somehow trigger really bad reactions of this sort. Also, steroids can do this. And as a matter of fact, one of the suicides in my in the Protracted withdrawal study was recovering from a terrible experience of many years of akathisia from withdrawal. that had faded, and then she was treated with an eardrop that contained an antibiotic and a steroid, and it re-excited all of that akathisia again, and she couldn't bear it. So it seems as though there can be triggers. I think that in some cases there could, it's an open question. It's something that I don't see often, though. So that might be a relief.
Just real quickly, I am thinking of someone who was on lithium for many years, as well as benzodiazepines. She came off of both, was doing great, decided that she wanted to have kids, had fertility treatments, and went into what would be called a manic state and wrecked her life. So I think the idea of persistent, prolonged conditions that express themselves later is very real.
I'll just add quickly, I developed akathisia, but it didn't start until 3 or 4 months after my cold turkey. I don't know why that is. Maybe, David can comment on that or something, or there's no explanation. But I've met other people in the withdrawal support groups too, where they said the first 3 or 4 months was not so bad. And then it was like, boom, something happened. And my father was a physician, and I remember he was my caregiver at the time. And I was saying, it's getting worse. It's getting worse. And he's like, that doesn't make any sense. We're so used to this linear healing. And unfortunately, I think in withdrawal, it's not always like that.
And just quickly to add, I've seen that with antipsychotics as well as with lithium and the so-called anticonvulsant mood stabilizers. These people will come off, they'll be doing great for a while, but they don't realize that they have increased stress sensitivity, it seems like. They get hit by a big stressor and like, boom, the rebound psychosis or the supersensitivity, they're in a crisis.
Yeah, it seems as though going off and on drugs, changing drugs, coming off of the drugs, causes a sensitization that may get triggered later, which is another scary thing about psychotropics being taken regularly for long periods of time. Medicine just doesn't understand these drugs very well, and I think a lot of people are suffering from perhaps being put at risk for this.
If I just jump quickly in here, one of the things that we probably make a mistake about is thinking that there's the psychotropic drugs and the other drugs. The psychotropic drugs go into the brain and the other drugs don't. Well, most of the very little of the serotonin in me and you is in our brains. It's in the rest of our bodies. And fluoxetine and drugs like this are antibiotics as well as drugs which are used to treat nervous problems. The antibiotics, in particular the tetracyclines like doxycycline, this is an SSRI. Lots of people don't know about it. They think it's just used to treat chest infections. Well, people become suicidal on it. They have their sex life wiped out on it, and they get withdrawal problems from it. So, it's not awfully surprising that things can be triggered again later by what we think of as a drug that's very different to the SSRIs that caused the problem, or the benzodiazepines that caused the problem. All sorts of other things may well be similar drugs to the ones that caused the problem to begin with. And the fact that they trigger further problems isn't hugely surprising.
Thank you all. Thank you for your input on that. And I just wanted to mention that, akathisia is such an important subject that gets mentioned to us often that we are going to devote a specific town hall to experiences of akathisia and to talking more about that. But I really appreciate the panel's thoughts on that. So to move on to another one, a viewer has asked, how do you convince a doctor that you are suffering protracted withdrawal if they do not believe it exists?
You change doctor.
Yeah, I'm just going to think you have. I'm just going to say you have to think about what you want from them, and it may be that what you need you can't get from them.
Right. I think that a lot of people spend a tremendous amount of energy trying to get validation from their doctors, and for the most part, it's not going to happen. You really just need to start thinking about taking care of yourself and not relying on an expert to do that for you.
I will say some of them are not knowledgeable, but they are willing to learn. And so if you can find one like that, that is going to be the best case scenario. And then you can teach them. That is how I got my current psychiatrist that I've been with for the last 10 years. And then the other thing is just, for those in the medical profession, it's, I see so many people who are angry, and rightfully so, that this has happened to them. I certainly was. But I think it's understandable that doctors don't know about this so much. In some instances, I think they're victims too. But what's unforgivable is the not being willing to learn or hear your patient when they come in and they have these papers saying, I'm having this protracted. I mean, it's not like there's no information. There is some. So we need doctors and healthcare providers to be more open to being taught by the patients, because like David has said all along, it is us who knows.
Yeah, and I think if there are providers and professionals out there, sometimes they're worried about being sued, but there is research on medical professionals being sued, and it isn't because someone has something bad to them happen, or there's a mistake that's made, or there's some negligence. People get sued because the relationship breaks down between the patient and the doctor. So if you have a good relationship, if you're really collaborating, if you create a strong alliance, then yeah, you can take risks with your patients and not have to feel like you're suddenly going to find yourself in court.
Thank you all. That was really helpful, and quite a general, wide subject here in itself. But someone's asked, if people are finding that they are struggling long term, what, in your experience, can make a difference for them?
Community. I think that's what I think all of us are involved in. That's why we do the community work that all of us do, is because we feel like one of the best answers to that question, I think.
I'll just say that all the things I probably should have done before taking psychiatric medications were helpful. Like, things to calm myself down. I do yin and restorative yoga, friendships, community, like Will said, but also just eating well and, taking really good care of my body. And then from, the perspective of what other people can do perhaps to help us is just, we need people in protracted withdrawal. We need patience and we need support. A lot of practical support is helpful. If your loved one is so sick that they can't clean or grocery shop, those sort of things, you can help out and make their life easier.
Yeah, I think that as we go about a normal life, we have expectations for the future, and when you have an accident, like an adverse effect from a psychiatric drug, it becomes very distressing that you can't make the same plans. And I think that we all have to become a little zen about this and really take it 1 minute at a time, calm ourselves down as much as possible, and it's so hard, but people are just cast in the same situation as people who have chronic illnesses. You just have to take it 1 minute at a time and do the best you can to help yourself heal.
Thank you. And is it fair to say that, and this is speaking generally, of course, there are always exceptions, but is it fair to say that research is showing a general improvement in people over time, admittedly with very, very large differences between individual circumstances, but is it fair to say there's a general improvement over time?
That's what our research is generally showing, yeah.
It just takes a very long time, and it's extremely gradual.
Okay, thank you. We are kind of coming up to, we're just past our time now, so I do thank you all for bearing with us. I want to thank you all for watching, for spending your time with us. I want to thank the panel for being so open and so honest in discussing these issues. You've raised some excellent questions, which we'll try and think about how we take forward into future discussions. And also we'll be posting the recording of this event in the next few days. keep a close eye on madinamerica.com for an announcement soon about the next in this series. Alternatively, if you visit Mad in America, you can sign up for our weekly newsletter, and all the details of future town halls will be there too. And really, before we end today, I just want to say that I know many people out there are struggling with coming to terms with long-term difficulty, and I am in that position too. I include myself in this. Please keep carrying on, because there is always the hope that tomorrow will be better than today. So with that, thank you all. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for the panel for giving up their time, and I hope you might consider joining us for our next discussion.